Hi guys, today we are doing in the series The Astrologically Famous, and today's video we are going to be doing Will Smith's natal chart. I do want to say please keep in mind that what I am saying and what I am doing is for entertainment purposes only. Anytime I do a natal chart reading, I'm only touching lightly on the person themselves. Believe me, you guys, there's a lot of information on natal charts that go way deeper than what I am doing. But either nonetheless, it's still just kind of fun to be able to get a general understanding and overall view of a person and who they are. And today we're going to be looking at Will Smith's. So I grew up watching a lot of Will Smith's movies. I like him as an actor. One thing I can say about Will Smith, though, is between him and a few other actors, I don't actually have a whole lot or know a whole lot about their life, just because I feel as though Will Smith is one of those people that are very private and they keep a lot to themselves. So I feel like Will Smith has really kept his reputation fairly clean for the most part, up until more recent events that have unfortunately, I guess you could say, air out his dirty laundry. So with Will Smith, he is an American actor and a rapper. He was also known as the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He started rapping when he was around 12 and got noticed when he was around 16 years old. So going into Will Smith's natal chart, right off the bat, I already can tell that with his ascendant in Gemini, he already has a lot of the traits. Ascendant is typically how you view the world, but it is also a lot to do with your outer appearance as well. So the ascendant is a lot to do with the first initial interactions, as well as perhaps even their own perception around people around them. So to have Gemini, this placement naturally makes him very quick-witted and very gifted with words. He can also come off extremely eager and always wanting to learn or even understanding new things. His brain would always be on the go, so for Will, he would have to have something that is mentally stimulating in order to keep his attention, but also in order for him to consider something to be important. He can also become overwhelmed due to desires and can do almost and wants to try and do everything all at once. And especially when it comes to his love life, he can also try and be everything all at once for his partner. He appears to have a very curious and talkative and outgoing personality. He seems to be the type of individual that, at least initially at first glance, is easy to get along with. He seems to come off very loving and very charming, and people who usually have Gemini in ascendant, now keep in mind your ascendant also gives away body parts. So people who are usually have Gemini in ascendant are typically taller in stature and usually have a slim to an athletic type of build. And typically people who have Gemini in the ascendant are usually very flexible, or at least more flexible than the average person. But these are different qualities that you can see within people's physical traits. And I would be able to say, I don't know how tall Will Smith is, but from what I can gather from what the ascendant in Gemini looks like, Will fits the category pretty well. So going into Will Smith's natal chart, he has a stellium. Now, in order to be considered a stellium, you have to have up to at least 3 to 4 planets inside of 1 to 2 houses, but typically they have to all be wedged in together, and that in order to be considered to be a stellium. So he has his 5th house is in Jupiter, Pluto, and Uranus, and the Sun, all sharing Virgo and Libra's houses. And typically having things in the 5th house. The 5th house is affiliated with feeling good, being creative, being childish, even casual sex like orgasms, pleasures, attention seeking, things that, a lot of people would enjoy. Something that brings you a form of fulfillment. Now, granted, for every single person, that would be different. And having his in Libra and in Virgo, I can see him really enjoying luxury, maybe the finer things like foods and just different things like that. So, having his sun here in Libra, this is a motivated, the sun is not very motivated or doesn't really like to be in the placement of Libra. They can consider that to be a debilitated spot for the sun to be in, mostly because the sun is all about your ego, but it's also about parts of your soul, but it's really a lot to do with personal development. And Libra is very outwardly focused, while Leos can be considered, well, they are more in my opinion, I think a lot of Leos are outwardly focused. But when it comes to the sun is wherever the sun is in the chart. That tells you a lot about where your energy and where your focus is always going to be in your life. So for him to have it in the sign of Libra, it can make it a little bit debilitated here. However, I have noticed that with other types of placements in his natal chart, it does kind of help counteract the debilitation in this spot. So people who usually have the sun in Libra, they are very motivated and they take action when it comes to things around justice, whether that's fairness and equality or whether they've witnessed something that was unjust. Many people with the sun in Libra have a melodic voice or are really easy to listen to. Oftentimes, people with this placement love to talk and can come off extremely charming and very grateful. And you can kind of sense that in the form of their speech as well, like the way that they come off. Sometimes people don't see them as somebody that has willpower. Sometimes they can even come off very self-absorbed. But having this kind of emplacement could have also, especially the fact that it is in his 5th house, has increased his creativity and helped him see and become more introspective than some people would be without having it in that 5th house there. So his sun is in the 5th house. This makes him extremely intelligent and full of energy in this type of placement. He can come off at times more bold or even eccentric, and especially when it comes to his actions, right? So Will Smith can be sometimes a little bit of a wild card, and I think it's because he tries so hard to restrain himself that on occasion I feel like sometimes he will act out and do things that may throw him and other people off. Usually he's generally liked by most people, and having the sun in the 5th house, that's where the sun naturally resides. So this is another thing that makes him more, I would say, naturally talented too, but also there is this comfortability that the sun feels being in its own territory. So this is another reason why I'm saying that even though his sun is debilitated in the sign of Libra, the fact that it's in the 5th house kind of helps ease it a lot more. And I feel like for him, he needs to feel recognized for his accomplishments and his hard work, and he wants people to acknowledge the work that he puts in. And the one thing too, though, is the sun and the 5th house can be very attention seeking or even at times superficial. So I can see that for him having this type of placement, some people can come and look at him as he's egocentric or that he is always seeking attention, especially the people that are closer to him. You know, the more in proximity and closer in proximity you are to Will, you might even realize that there are at times he can come off very surface level or very superficial. And one thing as well for Will is that he kind of can come off a lot happier than the average person, which may lead to others resenting or being jealous of Will as well, which could lead to them preconceived judging him. So his sun is in semi-sextile to Mars. And what this type of placement does is that a sextile is a very positive interaction between two planets. They actually can synergize, they actually can communicate, there is an easier flow. Things become a lot easier. And when it's in a semi like that, it just says that it's almost like the connection isn't as strong, but it's still there. It's still an underlying current that he carries. So sometimes with this type of placement, there can be a stop and go, kind of like the game red light, green light. It's like that is how he has lived his life. Throughout his life, there are times when he has to learn to pull back and when to give and when to receive. There's times when he has to learn to go after something, when not to go after something, especially when it comes to risks. This is something that he's had to learn to really taper down when it comes to him not going overboard on a situation or on a thing that he's passionate about. He can come off very playful and youthful, and especially when it comes to his physical appearance, he might even look younger than his age. But because of this type of placement, he has a tendency to become a little bit combative at times, or at least he needs to seek out hobbies or do something that can be a little bit competitive. Because Mars and the Sun can both be very competitive. Having something where it's like a healthy competitiveness, he would thrive so well with that. So something that gives him the ability to be in competition. With this type of placement, he can be quite popular, and especially when it comes to his self-expression. One other thing too is having this semi-sextile in Mars. This makes him want to be, or at least strive to balancing his relationships, especially when it comes to taking care of people that he loves, such as friends or family members. So his sun conjuncts Uranus, and what this can tell me here is he has to deal with a lot of different rapid changes. Now this can also take place in his line of work, especially because how close it can be to it's like for him, he might have these moments of things changing up on him, his schedule getting messed up. And for me, I personally believe Will Smith thrives more on a schedule than he does in a chaotic environment. So for him to have this type of placement, I'm sure there are drawbacks that has caused him to have moments of worry or just moments of having to just learn to roll with the punches, roll with the situation. Also, having this type of a placement, Uranus is kind of the rebel, so he might have a tendency of wanting to go against traditions or go against certain things. There is a side to him that is a little bit rebellious, especially with this type of placement. He can also have some kind of career that has make him kind of stand out of the crowd a little bit more. There's also something to do with having shocking behavior at times as well with this placement. Mentioning earlier that he has a tendency of maybe interacting or doing certain things that could come off random or out of the place or out of the blue, or not even maybe thinking before acting. It can be due to this type of a placement as well. And one thing to take note of is somebody with this type of placement, his childhood could have always been changing. And, this could be cause for a lot of nervousness and anxiety. that he could be experiencing throughout his entire life due to having to learn to develop self-acceptance, because having anywhere Uranus is can be very chaotic. And so to have Uranus in conjunction to the sun like that can cause people, especially in their childhood. I believe that, the fifth house is your inner child. It kind of tells you a lot about how and what you enjoyed. And I feel like for him, having that constant change and having that not quite knowing what you're going to expect may have caused him to just be a little bit more private, more secretive, could have caused him to be, like I said, a little bit more rebellious, not wanting to follow the rules. So we have here his sun conjunct Pluto. And this can be a very deep and an intense placement. So he can come off like a very intense person with this type of placement. There is a great influence and great power, or at least the great feeling of power when it comes to being in the crowd, or even feeling like power is being forced onto him. So even if he's not asking for the fame, or let's say he's not asking for the power that goes with the fame, it's like that burden is being placed onto him because of this type of placement. So there is this overwhelming burden that he may feel at times, mostly because he has somewhat more power and influence of people around him, whether he realizes it or not. And so for him, it's having to learn to use that in a responsible way. Now, some people who have met Will in person probably could attest or have said or mentioned things where sometimes staring into his eyes may feel like he's peering into your soul. So maybe there is a little bit of a rawness when being around Will, where you feel like maybe he can see right through you. He can also just read people easier than the average person just because of having this type of placement. So he can actually read body language pretty well, or whether that's just a general vibe that he could be getting from someone around him. He just knows on a unconscious instinctual level how he feels about a person. So also, people who have this type of placement, they have a tendency of leaving a mark or an influence around people. So even when they leave the room, they are not forgotten. And even when they pass on, they will be remembered for something. So these people are very rememberable, and they have, like I said, have a higher influence around people. Others around them, could kind of realize that he's very private. There's also some kind of a dark appearance, or it's like maybe even perhaps the way that he dresses or styles himself that can come off in a darker appearance, as well as he could be going through periods and points in time throughout his life where he can become very paranoid or very worried, and especially when it comes to lies or being deceived. So from time to time, Will can probably get into these moments of needing to get pulled back out because maybe he feels as though his life could be like a conspiracy theory, right? Where he just gets really worried or nervous, and those are times and places that could be because of this type of placement. So his sun is in opposition to Chiron. And this is a pretty awkward trait, because when you have the sun, like the sun in a lot of ways too can come off with your body language, but anywhere where Chiron meets, usually that can be either a very painful situation or a very awkward situation. It's kind of always a difficult placement to have. And so for him, he would like to choose a career that could help him to heal people. And I feel like if I'm not mistaken, I remembered a few years back, I was listening to one of Will's interviews, and he was mentioning something about that, like how he started to notice that, his acting helped healed people and brought them joy or laughter, or, so it kind of inspired him to continue to keep going. So that is something that I could definitely see Will thinking or relating to. So one thing about this placement is that his father could be in denial of his own vulnerabilities and his own struggles, and this could have led Will to having a rift between him and his father, and Will also repeating the same problem or the same pattern with not being able to be truly vulnerable and opening up as much. And when I get down more throughout the chart, we'll kind of talk more about it, but Will's parents separated, and I do know that the divorce between his mother and his father definitely left Will feeling more bitter towards his father about how he left the situation. But having this, he has a tendency of being able to self-sabotage himself a lot easier than some people can with this type of placement as well, having that opposition to Chiron. And there are times when even having painful experiences throughout his life could leave him to kind of stealing his joy or even his creativity at times. And so for him to have to kind of overcome that self-doubt and those insecurities to find himself again. So there have been maybe ups and downs throughout Will's life where maybe he's even questioned his career path, or he's even questioned why he's even doing the things that he is doing. There are also moments of self-doubt that he's not doing enough, or that he is not worthy of certain things. And so a lot of the time throughout his life and throughout his career, there would be things that keep coming up to cause him to have more of those insecurities. Another thing too is that he has to learn throughout time to not be a perfectionist. This is where I feel for him some of that core wounding is really happening, is that he's too perfectionistic, that he worries too much about the end product not being perfect. And when I go throughout his chart, I kind of start noticing a theme that he is having. And one of the themes that he is having is that basically throughout his entire chart, he is very on brand with himself. He believes that his work is his name, is his legacy, and so for him, he puts a lot of pressure on his work. Also, if you guys can hear a lot of noise in the background, I guess everyone decided to cut the grass when I just started to film. So, and I didn't want to stop, but that's what you're hearing right now. So we have the sun trine his ascendant. So success and happiness is guaranteed in this lifetime for him in some way, shape, or form. And obviously he has surpassed that. He's very successful. This can also, because of having it trine his ascendant like that, this can give him a lot of self-confidence and a lot of self-esteem. It also nurtures him to want to become more independent and be his own authority figure. And because of this type of placement, it comes off very positive. So he has a very positive and a very attractive, well-liked personality. And even the way that he expresses himself and his opinions and how he comes off to people, even when he comes off competitive, it can come off still charming and playful and non-threatening. There's something about Will's demeanor that he just makes you become more disarmed when being around him. So he just has that natural, likable appeal to him, which honestly has probably led him to get pretty far in his career, but also with others as well, and just gaining that influence with people. So now we're moving into his moon, and his moon is in Scorpio. So having this type of placement, again, makes sense. Like I said, out of a lot of different, and I'm not huge on celebrities, you guys, so I don't go out of my way to learn things about celebrities. So this is actually kind of a fun series for me because I feel like this is going to kind of help me learn more about just famous and successful people and about their lives and how they got there. But and just growing up, it was like him and Johnny Depp and Jim Carrey, in my opinion, like some of these other actors, they are a lot more private than other actors. And so I've just kind of grown to almost knowing the actor themselves as just who they play and not so much who they are as a person. And Will Smith was one of those people for me because he just always seemed to have had a clean reputation. Now, I believe that Will Smith has kept it clean for as many years as he has because he's very private, but he's also like he knows when to show his face, and then there's also times when he just pulls himself back completely behind the scenes where nobody really can see or know what he is up to. And so due to this has kind of left him being a mystery towards people, which makes a lot of people want to get to know him a lot more because of this type of placement. And having his moon in Scorpio as well can make him very captivating. Again, Scorpio is very powerful, and Scorpio's presence can be enough to just draw things towards it because there's something that it's like you want to learn more about the individual. So he's very secretive about his feelings. And not only that, but usually people who have moon in Scorpio are typically pretty loyal people. And there is a proudness and a strength that he might feel when it comes to his family or people that he cares about. There's also because he has the moon in Scorpio, there will be times in his life where he will be dealing with or has suffered traumatic experiences in his career or in his personal life. And it's because Scorpio is kind of more of a malefic, especially Pluto. It's a very malefic position to be in. So there is always some kind of trauma that comes into it. Now, this makes me believe as well, when people usually have the moon in Scorpio, Scorpio can have its own hidden taboos. So even his own inner dialogue, there are things that he might think that he would never say. And because of that, you can almost read that on his face. So that also leaves an air of mystery towards him. So his moon is in the 6th house. So he can have a tendency of worrying a lot, especially when it comes to health concerns, especially throughout his life, and as well as his job. So his job can cause him to have a lot of anxiety, and there is a lot of life lessons in this type of a placement. And for one thing as well is he needs to learn not to have to get validation from others when it comes to his career field or when it comes to even his health to some degree, because for Will, he might rely on other people to keep him on track. And not only that, but he wants people to acknowledge when he does good things or when he's doing his job, just because that's going to help him feel like he's on the right track. Now, people who usually have the moon in the sixth house, but because it's in Scorpio like this leads me to believe that he is going to be developing a lot of digestive problems. In medical astrology, when you kind of get more into it, the sixth house obviously signifies health, and usually depending on what planet is where and how it is impacting, there can be different types of varieties. But with him, I am seeing that digestion problems, and most of it can be coming from stress or anxiety that could be developing those. And it's also sometimes because he has such a stressful situation, he could overindulge in food or in substances that could lead to him having health problems further down the road. And that's another issue that he might be running into. So having the moon in the sixth house, he really does care about how his work is being perceived. So depending on, even with every movie that he has shot, he's probably really cared about the end result and how people are going to take it, and if it's going to be worth watching. So his moon is in sextile to Jupiter. So this can naturally make him very optimistic and very cheerful as a person. And I feel like for him as well, he can exude a pretty funny sense of humor and can come off playing kind of like a big role in his life. Like if when he's an actor, if you've noticed, he's always playing usually the front and center stage of roles. He's usually never a side character, and if he is, he still tries. It's like even when he is a side character in a movie, it's like he still somehow takes shot of the screen. He's very noticeable even when he's in the background of something. Like usually people can point him out because there's something about him that gravitates now towards you, having just the way he is in general. So, of course, him being in a big role or playing and having that big character energy makes a lot of sense with just how Will Smith is. Now, the cool thing about this placement is that this can actually lead him having good relationships when it comes to women in his life. And I'm sure that there are times that he has had good relationships with his daughter or even his wife Jada. Like there are times, important times, I feel like in Will's life where he has had great interactions with women that he can say that has changed or even morphed the way that he could have even been viewing relationships or even looking at a situation, because just having this sextile like that in between the two usually can signify that. Now, Jupiter also can signify the husband. So he could also be coming off and have had really good relationship and probably has had really good moments with his wife Jada that has probably impacted the memories that he may have experienced with her. Now, having this placement can also make him want to be extremely adventurous, especially when he was a kid. So he could have been the type of person who has gone out and done a lot of things at a very young age before he even got much older in life, which this can lead him feeling more fulfilled throughout his life. And as well as there's something about being able to make friends very easily with this placement, because he can come off very easygoing and can come off very fun, and there's something about him that seems generous too that can make people want to flock towards him. And his generosity towards people also can play a great role in his fortune as well. And it's funny too, because people who actually have this aspect oftentimes can lead to fame in the public. So he has been seen, and people that have the moon sextile Jupiter like this, it's just kind of interesting to know that that is a placement that can make you quite popular. So his moon conjuncts Neptune. Now, this is an emotional sensitivity. So for him, he's very in tune with people around him, and he can tell when there's something off in the room. Have you guys ever walked into a room after someone just got into an argument and you felt the tension in the room? Well, he can feel the tension in the room very easily the second he walks in. So he's very hyper aware of his surroundings around him and can be very sensitive being around certain people. He can easily get upset when others are rude or mean to him, and there's times when he can take things too personally, which could affect his self-esteem. So needing to learn to kind of break away from other people's moods with this placement, because like if his wife is in a bad mood, then now he's naturally in a bad mood, and that can just throw off the rest of his day. So needing to learn to be a little bit careful. This ability usually can make people very psychic, and he might even at times have very vivid dreams. But the one thing about this placement is that people can oftentimes daydream a lot with this type of placement. So being able to take those dreams and those ideas and turning them into something more practical than just being a daydream. So his moon sextiles Pluto, and this is very intense. So I believe that Will Smith feels very deeply, more than I think a lot of people can ever acknowledge, even probably more than I can even explain or acknowledge, because there is an emotional impact or emotional there's a lot going on inside of his mind. Now, one problem that Will Smith might have an issue with is staying out of drama. A lot of the times he can get himself into gossip or into things that might not potentially be the best for him. Now, because he has Pluto in this placement, he might have a tendency and or even talented ability to get to the bottom of situations. So if he feels like someone is lying to him, he can get to the bottom of what that is, whether or not that person would be aware of it, because he's just talented at naturally discovering what is mystery. Like he would be the type of person that would probably solve, like, you know, if you ever went to like one of those mystery parties and it's like, oh, who killed the person, right? Like a clues. He would probably be the type of person that could be like, oh, that's the guy who did it. Like he would just get down to the bottom of situations. He would be like a great detective. People with this placement are great detectives. So his moon is now squaring his MC. Now, for those of you guys that are not aware, your MC is basically what it is that you want to achieve before you die. It is the center of the sky when you were born, and it's basically telling you what it is exactly that you want to accomplish, what drives you, what makes you want to get up and create. And it's also one of those things that you want to be known for. So this can be kind of more like your legacy, what it is that you want to achieve. And having his moon squaring his MC, this can make him want to, like he cares very deeply about his work. And because he cares very deeply about his work, he can become very emotionally confused at times when it comes to his purpose, his career, and even his image. So he can develop strong attachments to people and even objects, which could be due to needing that emotional security. And he can become very famous with this type of placement, especially when it comes to charity work or deeds, things that are more humanitarian. So now we're going to get into his Mercury in Libra. Now his Mercury People usually with this, they are like born writers. They have a way with words and are really good at building relationships. They're also really good at bringing ideas to group endeavors, and he can oftentimes come off as a big picture thinker. And not only that, but he would be so good with group collaborating and just knowing how to help people, because although he can be prone to being a people pleaser, and sometimes though he can be indecisive and can procrastinate when it comes to group activities, because there is a little bit of a hesitancy there, also still having this placement. So he can at times maybe be a little bit too shy and maybe be a little too afraid to put his own input in, and might just agree with everybody in the room to save face and to not, destroy the status quo. Mercury in the 6th house. So having this placement was not easy for him to become more successful at his work. Because for him, he had to really work hard to get to where he is in his career now. And he might even be experiencing negative thoughts that could slow down his progress, his progression in his work. And there's times when maybe he might even be overthinking his job or overthinking his lines, right? Like because he's an actor, he's probably overthinking his scripts and his lines. He'll overthink his music. He'll overthink all of these creative endeavors. But there is a creativity, right? Because he uses his words a lot. He sings, he raps, he talks. And at times this could be a drawback for him. And at other times it could be kind of like a blessing having this type of placement. But because of this too, he can easily get very frustrated. And, there are times when he might be coming off funny and engaging in conversations and maybe making light of situations that perhaps he shouldn't, or maybe will say or do little things here and there that might come off out of place or out of the ordinary. So having his Mercury in conjunction to Venus, he is a very courteous person. He might even come off as a neat freak. Usually people with this, they come off very handsome, redefined, it's like a lot of people's idealistic type of person that a lot of people would want to be with. He strives for peace and wanting to solve problems between friends or loved ones, and he's very quick-minded and very intelligent. Now, again, it's like he is a big talker. I can see him being the type of person that can sell anyone a dream, but never choose to deliver on it, just because of how influential his speech is throughout his entire natal chart. And even just knowing what I'm aware of by Will Smith, and even the characters that he acts and plays as, you can still see that he does have that type of demeanor to him. So having his Mercury sextile Mars, he has kind of what you would consider a fighting spirit, and he can have kind of a sharp tongue as well as a sharp mind. So he can mentally and physically have quick reflexes because of this type of a placement too. And he has a very strong work ethic. One thing though is that he can come off very blunt at times with his words, and might be very quick, like I don't want to be this person, but when he slapped Chris Rock at the Emmy Awards, it was crazy to me how fast he just slapped him. Like it's like when they did a slow-mo, you can kind of see the impact. But that's what this makes me think of, right? So he has fast reflexes, as well as he's very sharp with his words. And this can even lead him to doing risky behaviors at times. Like, I mean, the fact that he did that to Chris Rock, I mean, that's like physically assaulting a person. He was just very lucky and fortunate that he didn't get charges pressed on him. But that is the type of behavior that could happen with this type of a placement. But chances are he'll always land on his feet again. Even if he does take the risk and it doesn't pay out for him, he'll find a way to recover from it. So we have Mercury in opposition to Saturn. Now, this can leave a lot of frustration and a lot of sadness when it comes to this type of placement, usually due to poor communication or feeling misunderstood by people around him. You know, there is a sense of intelligence and wisdom that he may have, and it's very easy for people to get lost in translation when he's trying to talk to them about it. A lot of people not even being able to relate or kind of understand. So there are times when he might even feel kind of isolated or maybe even a little bit alone with this type of a placement. He can take things more negative, especially when it comes to people nagging him or disagreeing with him. One thing that Will Smith hates is that there is a disagreement. He kind of strikes me as a type of person that he would want his partner to be very similar to him in a lot of ways. He also kind of strikes me as a type of person that wants to always have peace around him, like he strives for that, but that might even require him to sacrifice parts of himself as well as other people in order to retain that peace. And with this type of placement, growing up, he could have gotten harsh words or a lot of judgment or criticism from his parents, and this could lead him to taking criticism hard, or as well as him beating himself up now due to being in a household where verbal abuse may have been very present in the home. So we have here Venus in Virgo. Now, his Venus, this kind of tells a lot about him and his situation with Jada. So I'm going to kind of break down a little bit more into his chart. But for me personally, Will comes off as somebody who is more naturally monogamous or is more naturally somebody who prefers the one-on-one partnerships, who prefers the companionship long term. And I will have to do a video on Jada Pinkett Smith just because I am a little bit curious just to know more about her positioning and her symmetry as well. But from what I can tell, he is very loyal to his friends and to his partners, and at times he can come off not really sharing his emotions outwardly to those that he loves. So he might have a tendency of kind of withholding at times. Maybe he'll think like, oh, I love this person, but maybe not really verbalize it as much. And there are times when he can even come off very hypercritical to his loved ones. So there are times when he's trying to show love and care, but it can come off as criticizing them, or can come off as him wanting them to do better. I believe that even when he is at work, that he holds himself to a certain standard, and I can see him doing the same with his work colleagues as well. Like, he wants himself to be like, hey, if I'm expecting you to be this way, I want you to be this way. Like, you know, he strives to keeping himself put together. He strives to keeping his appearance and his hygiene up. You know, those are very important things to him, and he expects others around him to do the same. He's also huge on just kind of, there's something about Will that shows that he can at times have a tendency of maybe caring too much what other people think. Now, kind of getting into Will's life, Jada wanted more of an unconventional relationship. And while I can see him wanting to be more of a traditional monogamous relationship, I believe this is why a lot of people believe that Jada walked all over him, because he had a very loyal heart to her. And I think that, she wanted that, so he was more willing and more open, even though that's not something he wants. So there again is a sense of self-sacrificing to keep the peace or to keep the relationship. So his Venus is in the 6th house. This can kind of come off like very caring, very loving attitude. And I feel like he might have a love-hate relationship with people at his work environment with these kind of placements, because I feel like there are times when I can see Will just being such an awesome person to work with, and then other times he could just be such a horrible individual to work with because of the constant perfectionism, criticisms, and maybe even the unspoken standards that he may have. Oh, in Will's personal life, like in his actual career, Janet Herbert, she played as Aunt Viv in Prince of Bel-Air. In season 3, I believe she left and stated it was because of her pregnancy and her life situation. And Will didn't make it easy for her as well on the set, so she claimed that those are her reasons for leaving the set. I know that Will had stated something, I think he said something kind of passive aggressive towards Jeanette. But there definitely was a lot of friction on the set between the two. She basically said that he was pretty much an arrogant brat, and he was basically thinking that she was just angry that she was trying to take the spotlight from him. So there was just a lot of different types of issues there. But she is not the only one that has had issues with Will on the sets. But that is one thing to take note of. So Venus sextile his Mars, and this can be engaging. And again, there's something about him that kind of has this honest personality, very socially popular. His appearance is very beautiful or attractive, right? There's like a natural alluring appeal. And I've seen this throughout his entire chart where you can see that he has those natural tendencies and qualities about him. And he comes off very extroverted as well. And so this makes it really good for his career because he has developed those people skills. And people might even say that they might feel warm and fuzzy being around him because he has that kind of an aura around him. So very charismatic, very positive, very charming type of individual. Now, his Venus is in opposition to Saturn, and this can make it really hard to form loving relationships. And in his childhood, he could have even let him feel that he did not fit in. He could have even had poor social skills when he was a little bit younger and had to learn to develop it throughout going to school and as he got a lot older. He could have developed this unworthy or an inadequacy, especially because I feel like growing up, maybe not getting enough affection. I felt like there was a lot of criticism in the home, maybe him feeling very ostracized at times. And this could just lead to him having a lot of negativity, or even just like a lack of a proper parenting could be very possible with that type of a placement. So him needing to learn to relieve and remove guilt and self-pity, because that is something that's the type of aspect that can form with this type of placement, having that Venus in opposition to Saturn like that, because of the guilt and the self-pity that can occur from this type of placement. So his Mars is in Virgo. This can leave him, now we're kind of getting into Mars. We're finally leaving Venus. And having his Mars in Virgo, this makes him strive for perfectionism. So he makes him very perfectionistic. He can at times come off very self-sacrificing, or has even sacrificed his own well-being to get to the higher position. He can also come off very high-strung at times and even physically nervous, and can be seeking to release it by staying busy and kind of constantly moving around. So this again develops a very strong work ethic and goal-oriented. He can become very highly analytical and can be managing different types of projects at once. And he's really good at planning and organizing, or again, needing to always constantly have to have his life organized and planned. So his Mars is in the fourth house. So this could also indicate a lot about his childhood. Anything that is in the fourth house signifies mother or the home life. And in his childhood, I feel like it was not a very peaceful environment. Having Mars anywhere in the natal chart, you know that there is going to be some form of conflict or some form of opposition there. So for Will, having that in his household, he might have a tendency of needing to either move around a lot or feeling like he was in a lot of painful situations. There could even have been moments in points in time in his childhood where his father or just being in his home could have been physically violent. So there is a lot of obstacles and a lot of challenges that he had to have overcome. And there was always this form or sense of desire to be independent and to have his own sense of security. So this is something on having to even people with this placement maybe even strive harder than the average person to own a home, something that they can say is theirs. Of them could be very demanding with his time. His family could have been setting high standards and expectations for him growing up, which is something as to why he might have been developing that as well throughout his life. So in Will Smith's life, he is now trying to be more of a hands-on parent. He has claimed that he wanted to be more transparent with his children, and I know that his son Trey felt kind of abandoned by him since his divorce from his first wife, Cherie Zampino. And so I know that for him, he's been trying to be more open and more upfront with his children. So his Mars trine Saturn, and I know this is a very weird thing to state, but people who usually have Mars trining Saturn like this have a very well proportioned body, and everything just looks natural. It looks like it's where it's supposed to be. Everything is the right size. So there is something to be said about that, right? This also can come off with him being very determined, very passionate. He strives on the feeling of success and wanting to gain that kind of success. It's like getting a high off of being successful. So he also, this is another thing, anywhere where Mars is already a lot to do with your sex appeal, your sex drive, and having it trying Saturn like this can come off like a primal raw sex appeal that he could have. He also could be having or displaying leadership qualities. And also there is something to be said about having to have and develop self-discipline and hard work. And this is another reason why I can say that this will bring him a lot of respect and a lot of support from others around him because of the dedication and the consistency that he has developed with this type of placement. So he is very reliable and very consistent with what it is that he does. His Mars squares Neptune, and it's important for him to believe in himself. Bravery and glamour is something that can kind of come off from this type of a placement. He has had to learn to fight for something that he finds as a worthy cause. There are times when he might even feel discouraged or feeling like he can't accomplish certain things. So oftentimes he can lead himself feeling disappointed or needing to calm himself down. And this is another thing as well, as at moments and point in time in Will's life, he might actually need to take time to think things through and think things rationally. I do feel like there are points in time in Will Smith's life where he actually can get in his mind, like I mentioned earlier, that he could get very paranoid at certain points and periods throughout his life. It's kind of the same concept here, where I feel like he might even have those tendencies of needing people to help him talk him down from an emotional upheaval instead, and being able to rationalize his line of thinking before he acts out or does things that could be considered irrational, right? Or just quick responses. Also, having his Mars squaring his Neptune like this is a good thing for him to learn to not talk behind people's back and to avoid that at all costs. And especially because Will Smith gives off that disarming personality that's just, you want to tell him everything about yourself. There is this sense of wanting to naturally trust Will. And so it would not surprise me if Will actually knows a lot of people's dirty secrets, because whether he's around, like, let's say, for instance, if he's around other famous people and they're going to a party and then someone's drunk, I could see people just telling him their whole life story, or telling them about their affairs, or whatever it is that these people are doing. And if he talks behind their back and gossips, the chances of that getting back around that it was him is a lot higher due to this placement. So he had and has probably learned to keep his mouth shut over the years, because if not, it could have shot him in the foot. So his Mars squaring his ascendant, this gives a lot of energy to make him have more of a drive and a motivation, but this also at times can cause him to get more angry, or even can at times come off aggressive when he feels intimidated or when he feels threatened. He also has an ability to kind of scare others, and could even at times can come off very egotistical, very selfish. He might even come off very thin-skinned, where he doesn't take criticism very well, but there's like a dominating arrogancy, or even a form of defensiveness that can come with having Mars squaring the ascendant like that. So there's like a need to be very reactive. He might even be too quick to attack others, or maybe too quick to assume that he is going to be attacked, and that could cause him a lot of issues in his life. So now we are going to go into Jupiter altogether. So Jupiter in Virgo. He is very focused on helping others, which will bring him great success later on down the road for him. He is naturally edgy, especially when it comes to his work. And another thing too is that he can manifest his dreams through hard work and patience. So this man has really had to learn to develop patience and develop his skills. So he doesn't really get a whole lot of lucky breaks like a lot of other people do. This placement requires basically for him to learn to gain the long-term results and to reap the benefits long-term rather than short-term. So his Jupiter is in the 5th house. So he was born to enjoy life. He is open to new people and new experiences. And again, there's something about throughout this whole running theme of coming off warm, friendly, and having like a high sense of confidence in himself, this optimism, this type of, it's almost like when you're around him, it's like you feel like there's just new opportunities. You just feel like, he's just very warm, playful, friendly, but there's something about him that's kind of like a risk taker when it comes to life. And also, when it comes to his family and his children and his wife, he can become extremely generous to them. And he loves to learn and would love to teach people, especially when it comes to developing patience. I could see Will Smith being the type of parent that would teach both of his children to be a lot more patient with their craft and their skill. And he probably had to teach them to start from the bottom and work their way up. And then there's Jupiter conjunct Uranus, needing to be free, maybe hates feeling restricted. There's a quick and eagerness to him. So needing to, like, he strives off of having the schedule, having all of the calendar, everything worked out, but at the same time, there's a times throughout his life that he needs to break that anatomy, that he needs to break through and change up his routine from time to time. Another thing that he needs to work on as well is he needs to learn to be open-minded and allow others to live their life. He might have a tendency of being a little bit controlling to those around him. So having his Jupiter in conjunction to Pluto, so this can leave kind of a really strong need to make a difference in the world. This is also an intense drive, and when he gets into setbacks or failures, this won't stop him from continuously trying, but it is kind of an important thing for him to learn to continuously stand on his morals and his ethics and not waver between situations. So learning what is important to him and not abandoning himself, that is extremely important in this position. So he needs to remember that he is never too smart to learn from other people or from other teachers or even from other situations, because I think that at times he might be such a smart and wise person that he can forget that he can learn from other people. So now we're going into his Saturn, and his Saturn is in retrograde. So he has a lot of dread and a lot of burdens. Now, for those of you guys that might not be aware of what a retrograde is it's an optical illusion in the sky that happens every so many months or every so many times in a year. And basically, whatever it is it's kind of going against the grain of society. There's like more lessons that are there with retrogrades. But the cool thing with having a retrograde, in my opinion, in your chart tells you that even though there's a lot of more setbacks and there's maybe more challenges, there is also a lot more ability to learn. So inside of Will's life, Jada Pinkett Smith was in love with Tupac. And this was deeply affected Will and his self-esteem, and I believe that this could be a cause of a reasoning for not feeling good enough for him, not feeling like he is very loved in the relationship. And I think this also brought about a lot of different types of insecurities when it comes to Will. So Saturn in Aries, he has a good reasoning skills and at times can come off hard to break his focus. He can try to force his ideas of right or wrong on people. He can also have a tendency of needing to control every situation, being disciplined about his body and his actions and even his leadership skills. He can come off at times as being bossy or even hot-headed, and there are times in Will's life where he can be downright cruel, and he needs to learn to cool down the fire that he feels inside of himself when he is feeling these intense emotions. And I think that there are times when he can get kind of the best of himself. He has damaged his reputation while slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars, and he spent a long time building up his persona as this nice, lovable guy that everyone knows him to be, and then he goes and he does such an act out of nowhere. In my personal opinion, I think it has a lot to do, and this is no excuse by any means, because again, you shouldn't be putting your hands on people, but I think that I wonder if Will did it because he was going through a lot with Jada at the time, and I think his emotions were already running very high at that point, and then for having having him made that joke about Jada, I think that kind of infuriated Will. And then not only that, but I think that after he did it, he probably realized how bad that looked on his career and actually how bad that looks for himself to act out. So I think for Will, I think the one person that could really impact his emotional state, probably more than most people, would be his wife. And I feel that she has used that against him a few times. And like I've said, I don't think Will is completely innocent in the situation between the two, and it's not really even my place to speak on. But I do believe that him acting out in that frantic, crazy way, I think that was kind of just due to, like, for instance, I kind of wondered if they could have potentially argued before going to the event, and then him making that joke could have set it off. There could have been a lot more there to the situation, but that is something that Will Smith definitely did do. And like I said, it kind of, when I very first heard of him doing that and slapping him at the Oscars, I was kind of like, I just never pictured Will Smith being that person, but it didn't like shock me or surprise me, because nothing people do shock or surprise me anymore. But still, it's one of those things where it kind of does show the impulsiveness that he can have at times, especially when his emotions are running high in a situation. So having his Saturn in the 12th house, again, it's really the 12th house is all about ascending. It's all about the ethereal. It's about the dream state. It's about things that I guess you could say it is the only the only house in your zodiac that is not really tangible. It is more of the spiritual side. So there are times when he has a hard time letting go of things that he's done to people or people have done to him. And there's also this constant need of beating himself up over the past and things that he can't make, the mistakes that he's made. There is a feeling of a sense of overwhelm with this type of a placement as well, because wherever Saturn is, Saturn's going to teach you a lot of harsh lessons wherever it's at. And so for him, having it in the 12th house, there has to have been moments and points in his life where, he might have questioned his morals, he might have questioned his ethics, he might have questioned who he is as a person, and this could have led to him spiraling down into learning about religions or spirituality, or wanting to grasp a firmer idea, because Saturn wants to bring things to the physical. So having something that's abstract as the 12th house and to try and bring that into the physical could be where there is kind of this disconnect between his higher self and even maybe perhaps his lower self. So in this area, there could be a lot of self-doubt. There could be a lot of worry, anxiety, but again, there's something about him wanting to seek out and achieve something in mastery in this area in his life before passing on. So having Uranus in Virgo, we are now moving on into Uranus. He is intelligent and complicated individual. And at times he can even have come off as a kind of like an original thinker. He thinks for himself. He has the creative spark. And it's not like I don't get the vibe that Will Smith has tried to rip off of others. And even if he has, there is something about him taking something that was once overdone and made it his own uniqueness. So again, there's something about Will really branding himself. And also, not only that, but when it comes to most situations, he's able to come up with a very good solution to the problem. He can change things in common ways of thinking, and he's even good at spreading new ideas and even can help transform people's situations by just his words alone. Sometimes he can think or say something and it could be such good advice that people, without realizing it, maybe he's been changing people's lives due to that. So in Will Smith's life, he was born and raised religious, and he kind of grew up around a Catholic school, and even himself has mentioned that he believed that they were kind of racist towards him. So he has dealt with discrimination and dealt with things in his life, but this also could have shaped the way that he views religion and even views spirituality, just being in that kind of school and in that kind of environment. So his Uranus is in the fifth house. Oftentimes, this can attract unusual people towards him, but there's also a lot of people that are very individualistic that he is around. So his social group can be around a lot of unique individuals and just a lot of interesting characters. Now, his love affairs are not usually something that he will ever talk about, but having Uranus in the fifth house, there are times where there is unconventional relationships. Now, this can even be unconventional friendships, unconventional relationship with family, but I'm getting even unconventional relationships with people that he works with, where he might have the lines blur between friends and lovers or between friends and work colleagues. But there's something here where this makes a lot of sense with Jada because she naturally gravitated with Will. More like Will gravitated towards her, but unconventional relationship seems to be kind of what she's going for. And so that makes a lot of sense that he would have someone like that in his life that at least suggested it or was open to it. And again, I feel like these are people that are drawn to him more than he actually is. I do believe that Will Smith is a little bit more conventional with his love life. So Uranus in conjunction to Pluto, again, another intense need for freedom in his life, wanting, this is like a huge power play dynamic between being free and feeling trapped. And sometimes these can even cause him to have changes in his life experiences. This can cause a lot of strain or even like manipulation from other people and even people in society. So, there's times when even being gaslit in society and him feeling that kind of pressure, he can at times turn his life around really, really quickly when it comes to relationships, when it comes to hard times. If he's fallen on hard times, he won't be there for long. If he's having issues in his relationships, he probably will not be in that for long, whether that's resolving it, moving on, or something happening in the connection. So there's always a constant state of moving around with this type of placement. So his Uranus is in opposition to Chiron, and this aspect is rare due to it being 40-year transit. So this doesn't happen very often. So having this kind of placement is pretty cool, and he can have these deep desire to change society. And this is something that kind of stems from having this type of placement. This can cause him to want to own his own personal wounds and for wanting to change things. He wants to change things. He wants to heal through situations. And here's the thing though, this could cause a lot of problems in his life because of being scared of being rejected, right? Putting yourself out there, being scared of the opposite groups. So his whole life, I believe Will has had to learn to not compromise himself. He's had to learn to be more selfish within his own self. Because I feel as though he will lie to keep the peace. I feel as though he will compromise his morals and his ethics to keep the peace, to make someone else happy. And those are just not who he is. So there's a sense of needing to learn who he is, but being triggered or having that fear of rejection is a very strong placement with this in his Chiron. So his Neptune in Scorpio, we're getting into the watery planet here with Neptune. So this brings a sense of privacy and even possess, allure, or attract people. So having his Neptune in the 6th house, this is important for him to have a job that serves others to as well as himself, and needing to have that expression. So being able to be creative, being an actor, being a musician, this seems to kind of fall into Neptune pretty easily. So it does not surprise me to see that he was a rapper, to see that he was a poet, or even to see that he is an actor, because this seems to kind of fall more into the play and line of what it is that he just does naturally on his own. So he needs to keep up on his daily routines. This is going to help him feel grounded and help him feel like he is still in the physical, that he's doing his actions. This can also at times, though, add to his imagination, and this can also help him in his career, and at times can also detriment him in his career. And also, there is a form of altruistic attitude that he carries about wanting to help support others and wanting to care for others. And that is such a likable trait that he is carrying. So having Neptune trine Chiron, this is a very deep wound. Again, anything where Chiron is very intense. So to have his Neptune trining his Chiron, this can have him be very artistic with his skills and his work, and this can make him become very wise and very compassionate, very even empathetic towards other people. Because of his own struggles, he can relate to them. This can also lead him to being more understanding and even being more patient with other people. One of the problems, though, and one of the deepest wounds that he needs to work on and heal in this lifetime is having to, despite all of his pain and all of his trauma, is still having to learn to have kindness and compassion towards other people that he meets, but more so for himself. So this is something that he inherently needs to work on, is being kinder to himself, especially because I've noticed that with Will, going through his chart, like he is so hypercritical of himself that this is a wound that obviously needs to be worked on. Having his Pluto in Virgo, we're now entering into Pluto or Scorpio's domain. And he can at times seem very unapproachable to people due to just having a kind of a cold approach to life, or even sometimes he can come off at times being too practical towards other people. And this is something where this can cause him to have a lot of focus and a lot of drive in his career, but also even helping other people. So there is a positivity to this aspect, but there's just something about how he can at times come off a little bit cold and detached from people. So having his Pluto in the 5th house, he is a very creative person. He's very attractive, especially again, he's very attracted to movies, art, music, literature. He has a really strong need to wanting to express himself with this type of placement. This can also lead him to being a natural born leader. And having his Pluto in the 5th house can bring him having powerful children, or even having a very successful field, whichever field he chooses to be in. So Pluto in opposition to Chiron, his core wound leads to a lot of insecurities and a lot of internalizing powerlessness. So playing the victim or feeling like having victim-like mentality can be a problem with this position. He also can have a tendency of projecting out to others that powerlessness. So there are times when he needs to learn to become more understanding and having more perspective when it comes to other people, because with this type of placement, anywhere where Pluto goes, Pluto likes to dominate the arena or the area. And so for him, it's having to learn not to control other people, and knowing that other people have the right to have their freedom and their power as well, and not needing to feel like they're always walking on eggshells or feeling like he's always trying to control who they are. So now we're going to be entering into his north node. Now, his north node, in my opinion, anyone's north node is very important because it tells you why you reincarnated on Earth or why you're even here. So when it comes to the moon has a south and a north node, and it's like two focal points right in between the moon. And basically, this tells you why you have reincarnated back on Earth. So your south node is what you have achieved and what you have grown into in the prior life. And then your north node is what your soul is striving to accomplish before passing on in this life. And so it's really cool to be able to see the karmic and the dualities that play out between the two. But I'm going to kind of break it down because, to be honest with you, this does make a lot of sense when looking at his chart. He has a tendency of trying to control other people, but also simultaneously needing to want to be free as well. And there's also this back and forth relationship with those around him. I think that Will Smith is always constantly sacrificing parts of himself in order to be liked and loved. And in this time and in this lifetime, his North Node is trying to push him away from those people-pleasing behaviors and getting out of it's almost like getting out of his own form of self-sabotage by being able to work on these traits. So as we're getting into it here, his North Node is in Aries. So what this tells me here is that he has to be very independent and oftentimes knowledgeable, and he had to learn to survive at a pretty young age. So he had to grow up without a lot of parental supervision, or he had to just grow up in a household where it could have even been very strict or very domineering. But regardless, this kind of placement can show that there could be a lot of strain when it comes towards his parents and parental figures. So attributes that he needs to develop in this lifetime is independence, self-awareness, trusting one's impulse, courage, constructive self-interest, moderation in giving, and self-nurturance. So learning to give when needed, because I think he's an overgiver, and also learning to be kind to himself, loving himself, nurturing himself, and not just being too hypercritical. Tendencies that he has to leave behind in this lifetime is seeing oneself through others' eyes, debilitating selflessness, constantly putting himself down, being Mr. Nice Guy, obsessive attachment to external harmony, needing to keep the peace, and the tit-for-tat mentality. These are the things that he needs to work on in this lifetime in order to develop himself in ways that, especially with having his Saturn in the 12th house like that, these were things that would really help benefit him. So this is something that he has to learn. There is a lack of identity in loving spirit and self-sacrificing. These are things that he has to learn to work through. Now, his North Node is in the 11th house. And what's interesting is the 11th house is basically some of the categories that fall into the 11th house. So this is Uranus's domain or Aquarius's domain. And the cool thing about it is that it is everybody in the population, right? Everyone around you. It can also be a significant of stepchildren, like step siblings, things like that, could fall into the 11th house. It's more like your stepchildren, but I digress. It can also be just anything that can be considered even political, anything that's kind of like in the public eye, a lot of times can fall into the 11th house. And so to have his North Node in the 11th house, this is telling me that this is a great placement for building connection, to reaching out and having a common goal with people, being like he just doesn't feel like he is alone. Again, though, this is a problem because it's almost as though it's put here just for him to learn to be his own self. You can be your own self, still have your own morals, still have your own ethics, and be in a group, or have differing opinions with people around you, but still keeping and holding the peace. Learning that not everybody has to agree with you, and not everybody has to agree to get along. Also, he might have to learn to not be so self-centered at times when it comes to the group, or even having to learn to kind of put his ego aside for the common good of the group. So this can cause for him to have a vibrant personality, especially when it comes to entertaining people. He's very easily able to entertain others with having it here, and he can come off very playful. Again, there's something here about running theme, very charming, warm, likable, playful. This placement is in need of balancing the self and others, though, and having to learn to work together as a whole with people, but still be able to still keep his own individuality. So his north node sextiles his ascendant, and this can leave a lot of karmic connections between him and other people in this lifetime, and this can help him find his purpose in his life. This is likely to help him find people who are awakened like him in his spirituality or even in his purpose in life, and this can lead him to having less drama and less stress, breaking out of his comfort zone with this type of an aspect, because he can be around people that are a little bit more usually supportive of him. So now we have here his Chiron. Now his Chiron is in retrograde, which again, this causes him to have a deeper reflection on his traumas and his wounds. And believe me, he's very acutely aware of his insecurities that impact him on a soul level, right? He knows what is the deepest wounds for him, and this is something too for him as well, as to learn to build on that and help others through that. So anywhere Chiron is one of those situations. It's a comet, but it is a situation in where everybody has a core wound that really, really hurts us. And for him, it's like if he can find a way to incorporate that into his line of work and help other people overcome the insecurities that he so desperately wishes to get rid of, which within Chiron is a very hard placement. It's basically stating that your soul, like the wound is so deep that your soul would not be able to heal it in this lifetime, and probably not even in the next lifetime. And so it's basically saying when you help others, it helps mend that wound and it helps medicate it. It doesn't get rid of it, but it helps you feel relief from the wound. So he can have a lot of deep wounds, a lot of insecurities, and a lot of things he has to reflect, right? So for him, it's also feeling things on an intensified level. So his Chiron is in Aries, and this is an identity wound. Shocker, right? Now, not only do we have it in the North Node, but now he also has it here in his Chiron. So an identity wound is something that I think he will struggle with the most in his life. And this is something that I think not only at such a young age, but all the way up until the last time he takes his breath, right? He's going to be struggling with learning and identifying with himself. So he doesn't feel the right to be himself. And he also could feel ashamed or even feel broken or inadequate in some way. So in this lifetime, he must learn to let go of things that no longer serve him. He has to go after his own dreams and his goals. And I feel like for a lot of his life, he's had to kind of figure out, like, who am I? Why am I this way? And that's what I mean by, I think Will Smith has really branded himself, because he's always had this, who am I? How do I want people to perceive me? There's a lot of self-doubt and a lot of hypertension on his own self, that I think that has been kind of a trigger for him. But it's finding his own unique purpose and his own actions. And pretty much the cool thing about this, though, is I feel like he has worked through his Chiron quite a bit, where it's like he's taking actions and bringing things into reality, bringing what he enjoys doing into reality, like his rapping career and acting. So his Chiron is in the 11th house, and he could come off sometimes feeling rejected from friends and others around him, and this could lead him to feeling very lonely and feeling very misunderstood in group settings. And so this is, again, reflecting on that deep wound that he feels, where he feels like he has to find a way to form his own identity in the group, and finding out how he can contribute to the goal and how he can contribute to the group. So needing to figure out where he is. I think his whole life he's felt kind of outcasted and never felt like he kind of fit in. And even though I feel like Will Smith is such a likable guy, I think that's what's so incredible about this, is that I think a lot of people would be very shocked to hear this, because I think Will is such a liked guy, and he comes off very likable, and a lot of people I think would have good things to say about him. But there again is this sense of feeling deep down inside he doesn't feel like he fits in with the people that like him. I think that a part of him feels like he's struggling to figure out his own identity and who he is. And it's almost like he's needing to grieve some of the friendships that he's had, and grieving even parts of himself, right? Because I think that Will Smith has had metaphorical deaths, right, so to speak, about his own self and who he is. And I think there are times when he's constantly changed who he is in his life, just because I think he's evolved with time and found that some of the things that he believed or thought is not really who he is, but maybe the identification of how others perceived him. So it's really having to differentiate between others and self, and needing to learn, is this who I am, or was this projected onto me? So now breaking into his MC. His MC is in Aquarius, and oftentimes people with this, they're very influential, mostly due to the fact that Aquarius has a lot to do with community and friends. And having this in his career, most of the time, I feel like this placement will be, a lot of times when people have Aquarius in the MC, it's usually a scientific field in the career, or spirituality, or even humanitarian, right? Now get this though, this is a kicker. People who usually have Aquarius in the MC usually can be affiliated with television. So again, natural entrepreneurs. Also for him, it's like being front and stage and center, having him being seen on televisions all around the world. This makes sense that he is an actor. So having his IC now, we're going to go all the way down into his childhood. His IC is in Leo, and this is his childhood, and this is something where he's had to keep up a facade, something that doesn't actually reflect his own inner truths. So he's had to learn to keep himself quiet, had to learn to not speak up. He didn't get a lot of one-on-one attention as a child, and this could have forced him to have to fight for attention, and had to learn to be independent without having to care for other people around him, getting that love and care from those around him. He could have had one family member who always stole the spotlight. Maybe he felt like he was always a shadow behind a particular family member. He could have been looked down on for his emotional outbursts and having a strong opinion at times when he was a kid, and he could have even been punished for being upset. So he had to learn to kind of suppress parts of himself. And but at the end of it all, though, even as him as a child, he was always very fun, always wanted to, always kind of grew up with this big energy, right, for life. He could have learned to have had fun without trying to get into trouble, though, growing up, just because of the household that he was in. So there is a lot there to Will. And like I said, I know that for Will Smith, he was the oldest out of 4 children. And so for him, he probably wasn't getting the spotlight. I think a lot could have fallen on Will's shoulders just from being the oldest and then, the oldest of 4 kids. And not only that, but also I do believe that, Will Smith has dealt with racism growing up, which could have shaped the way that he viewed parts of his life as well. But I know that for Will Smith, more than anything, when it comes to his parents and their divorce, I know that Will Smith still has a grudge towards his father, because I know that Will has mentioned it once or twice that, he didn't like how he walked out on the family. He didn't really like how that kind of came about. So seeing that even inside of his chart that there could have been some issues towards Will and his father really makes a lot of sense. And also, not only that, but Will is very generous with his family. I know that he takes his mom out like once a year to go on a vacation. He does a lot of different things with his family. So Will is very family oriented. But I do know that for Will Smith, just kind of growing up, he talks still very highly about his father, but I know that there's definitely some issues there that Will has experienced with his dad that I think that he probably would never say to the public, right? So, especially given on how secretive he can be, as well as especially when it comes towards his feelings. But going through Will Smith's natal chart, it definitely has given me more of a respect for Will Smith, because I can actually see kind of how deep he is as an individual. But not only that, just knowing that he actually put in all of that hard work and all of that effort into being as successful as he is something to be admired. But also, I feel like Will Smith has a lot more layers to him than he leads on with his charming, warm, nice, friendly persona. So that is the reading that I have for Will Smith and his natal chart. I hope that you guys enjoyed it and this gave you guys more of an insight into Will and who he is as a person. Thank you guys for tuning in and watching. Have a great and wonderful day. Like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thank you guys. Have a good day. Bye.